I came home early from a trip to surprise my daughter, only to find her abandoned and fighting for her life in the ICU. Her husband, the man who swore to protect her, wasn't by her side. He was living it up in a Las Vegas penthouse with another woman, spending my daughter's money as if it were his own. I'm a retired accountant. I know numbers, so I did the only thing I could. I froze every single one of his accounts. The phone call I got an hour later wasn't from a concerned husband. It was pure evil, and it was just the beginning of a nightmare that would uncover a web of lies, betrayal, and a secret so dark it almost destroyed us all. Before we get into the details of this insane story, I'd love to know where you all are watching from. It's amazing how these stories can connect us from all over the world. Drop your city or country in the comments and let me know what time it is where you are. It's always fascinating to see. Okay, let's get back to it. It all started on what was supposed to be a happy day. The Oregon air had been crisp and clean, a welcome respite from the constant hum of Los Angeles. Visiting my sister is always a balm for the soul, but after 10 days, I was itching to get home. I missed my daughter, Sarah. I decided to cut the trip short by 2 days, picturing the look of surprise on her face when I'd walk through the door with a silly souvenir from a Portland market. The drive down the I-5 felt shorter than usual, fueled by anticipation. I pulled into my quiet suburban street in the late afternoon, a familiar comfort settling over me. But as I parked in front of Sarah and Kevin's charming little bungalow, the comfort evaporated, replaced by a prickle of unease. The house was dark. Every blind was drawn, and there was a stillness about it that felt wrong. Sarah's car was in the driveway, but Kevin's was gone. Maybe they'd gone out for an early dinner, I told myself, trying to brush off the feeling. I walked up the pathway, my suitcase wheels rumbling loudly in the silence. That's when I saw it. Tucked into the door handle was an envelope, its corners curled and dusty. It was from Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. My heart didn't just drop, it plummeted. 1,000 scenarios, each worse than the last, flashed through my mind. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers suddenly clumsy and slick with sweat. I dialed Sarah's number, straight to voicemail. My thumb shook as I scrolled to Kevin's name, straight to voicemail. Panic, cold and sharp, began to claw its way up my throat. This wasn't right. Kevin was always glued to his phone. I abandoned my suitcase on the porch and ran to my car, the hospital's address burning in my mind. The 20-minute drive felt like an eternity. Every red light was a personal torment, every slow driver a villain in my unfolding horror story. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe it was a minor thing, a broken arm, a precaution. But the dusty envelope told a different story. It had been there for days. Days. I parked haphazardly in the hospital's massive parking structure, not even bothering to note my spot. Inside, the sterile smell of antiseptic and the low murmur of hushed conversations did nothing to calm my frantic pulse. I rushed to the main information desk, a wide, impersonal counter of polished granite. A woman with a kind but weary face looked up. "I'm looking for my daughter," I said, my voice coming out as a breathless croak. "Sarah Miller." She typed the name into her computer, her expression neutral. I watched her face, searching for any clue, any sign that my fears were overblown. But her expression shifted. The professional calm faltered, replaced by a look of deep sympathy that terrified me more than anything else. She looked up from her screen, her eyes meeting mine. I braced myself, gripping the edge of the counter until my knuckles turned white. At the information desk, I stood trembling, waiting for the receptionist to speak. Her face softened with a pity that my stomach churned. She finally looked up, her voice gentle, as if delivering a verdict. And the 6 words she spoke next didn't just break my heart, they shattered my entire world into a million unrecognizable pieces. "Your daughter is in intensive care." Intensive care. The words echoed in the cavernous lobby, each syllable a hammer blow against my sanity. The receptionist explained that Sarah had been admitted 6 days ago. 6 days. My mind reeled. While I was enjoying wine with my sister, laughing over old photo albums, my only child had been lying in a hospital bed fighting for her life. A wave of guilt so powerful it made me physically sick washed over me. How could I not have known? Why hadn't anyone called? A kindly nurse appeared, seemingly out of nowhere, and gently guided me toward the elevators. "I'll take you up to the ICU," she said softly. The elevator ride was a silent, agonizing ascent. My mind was a chaotic storm of questions. A severe car accident, the receptionist had said. Was Kevin with her? Was he hurt too? That had to be it. They were both here, unable to call. It was the only explanation that made any sense. The ICU doors hissed open, revealing a world of hushed urgency. The air was thick with the rhythmic beeping and whirring of machines, a symphony of life hanging by a thread. The nurse led me down a long corridor to a station where another nurse sat, monitoring a bank of screens. She looked up as we approached. "This is Carol Peterson, Sarah Miller's mother." The second nurse's eyes were filled with a mixture of compassion and something else. Exhaustion. "We've been trying to reach family," she said, low. "We left messages." "I was out of state," I stammered, the excuse sounding pathetic even to my own ears. "Her husband, Kevin, is he here? Which room is he in?" The nurses exchanged a look. A fleeting, almost imperceptible glance that spoke volumes. It was a look I would come to understand too well, the look of people who have a terrible truth to deliver. "Let me take you to see Sarah first," the second nurse said, deftly avoiding my question. She led me to room 512. She paused with her hand on the door. "I need to prepare you, Carol. Her injuries are, extensive." Nothing could have prepared me. Nothing. The woman in that bed was not my daughter. My Sarah was vibrant, her face always ready with a smile, her eyes sparkling with life. This person was a swollen, bruised stranger, her features distorted and almost unrecognizable. A thick tube snaked from her mouth connected to a ventilator that pushed air into her lungs with a steady, mechanical whoosh. Wires and IV lines disappeared under a thin hospital blanket, connecting her broken body to a constellation of monitors that beeped and blinked, charting the fragile rhythm of her existence. Her left leg and arm were encased in bulky casts. A large white bandage was wrapped around her head. I think I made a sound, a choked sob that was swallowed by the noise of the machines. I stumbled forward, my legs feeling like they belonged to someone else. I reached out and touched her hand, the one not riddled with IVs. It was cold, so cold. "Oh, baby," I whispered, tears streaming down my face, blurring the horrific scene before me. "I'm here. Mom's here now." The rhythmic whoosh of the ventilator was the only answer. It was the sound of my daughter's life being sustained by a machine, a sound that would haunt my nightmares for months to come. I sank into the visitor's chair, my body finally giving in to the shock and horror. My beautiful, vibrant daughter was gone, replaced by this broken shell. I gripped her cold hand, my gaze fixed on her battered face, and asked the nurse the question that had been screaming in my mind since I'd arrived, my voice barely a whisper. "Her husband, Kevin, where is he? He must be devastated." The nurse's hesitation before she answered told me the nightmare was only just beginning. The nurse, whose name tag read Maria, pulled the door slightly closed, giving us a semblance of privacy. She took a deep breath before she spoke, choosing her words with a practiced care that told me she'd delivered bad news before. "Mr. Miller was here the night of the admission," she said, her voice flat and clinical. "He signed the initial consent forms." I waited for her to continue, to tell me he was in another room, recovering from his own injuries. But she just stood there, her expression unreadable. And, I prompted, a new kind of fear, sharp and ugly, starting to curdle in my stomach. "Where is he?"
He hasn't been back since that first night, she said quietly. We've called him multiple times. Important medical decisions needed to be made regarding Sarah's care. The calls went straight to his voicemail. The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. That's impossible, I whispered, shaking my head in disbelief. He wouldn't just leave her, not like this. But even as I said the words, a cold, hard knot of certainty was forming in my gut. The police report might shed some light, Maria offered gently. I can have a copy sent up for you. The police report? I asked, confused. What happened, exactly? Her eyes were full of pity. According to the report, Kevin was driving. The vehicle was traveling at over 90 miles an hour in a 45-mile-per-hour zone when it lost control and hit a concrete divider on the freeway. 90 miles an hour. The number was obscene. And Sarah? I choked out. She wasn't wearing her seatbelt, she said, her voice barely audible. She was ejected through the windshield. My knees gave out. I would have collapsed if the chair wasn't already there to catch me. The images her words conjured were a slideshow of pure horror. My daughter, my beautiful girl, thrown through shattering glass. And Kevin? I managed to ask, a strange, icy calm beginning to descend as raw, primal anger started to replace the shock. He sustained minor cuts and bruises, the nurse said, checking a monitor. He was treated in the ER and released the same night. Released. The word hung in the air, thick and poisonous. He walked away. He walked away from the mangled car, away from the hospital, away from his wife, who lay shattered and unconscious, and he just vanished for 6 days. The anger was a fire now, burning away the tears, clarifying my thoughts. This wasn't grief. This wasn't shock. This was abandonment. This was something monstrous. I looked at the nurse, my voice suddenly steady, the voice of the CPA who had faced down IRS auditors and corporate bullies for 30 years. Yes, please, I want to see that police report and every single medical document you have. I am her mother. I am her next of kin. And from this moment on, all decisions regarding her care go through me. Maria simply nodded, a look of what seemed like relief on her face. As she left to gather the paperwork, I leaned close to Sarah's ear, careful not to disturb any of the tubes. I'm going to find out what happened, baby, I whispered fiercely. I'm going to find him, and he is going to answer for this. This is the point where my world split into a before and after. Before, I was just a mother. After, I became a detective, a protector, and an avenger. And I have to ask you all, what would you have done in my shoes? Finding your child in that state with a husband who has completely disappeared off the face of the earth. Let me know your honest first reaction in the comments. I'm really curious to know. Now, as I sat there stewing in my rage, I decided to make the first move. I pulled out my phone, my fingers hovering over Kevin's contact. I needed answers. But before I could even type a single word, my phone buzzed with an incoming call. It was him. Seeing Kevin's name flash on my screen sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I took a shaky breath. Trying to suppress the rage that threatened to choke me, I needed to be calm. I needed to be strategic. I answered the call. Kevin, I said, my voice surprisingly level. Carol, thank God. I've been so worried. I heard you were back. Worried, I repeated, the single word dripping with ice. You have a funny way of showing it. Where are you, Kevin? It's complicated, Carol. I had to go take care of some urgent business out of town. The trauma of the accident, I wasn't thinking straight. Listen, the reason I'm calling is about Sarah. The doctors need to perform another procedure, and they need consent. I'm not there to sign, and it's holding everything up. My blood ran cold. He hadn't been here for 6 days, but suddenly he was concerned about a procedure? What procedure? I demanded, my eyes darting to the monitors beside her bed, searching for any sign of change. It's something to do with the pressure in her head, he said vaguely. Look, it's all very technical. The point is, I need to be able to make these decisions for her quickly. My lawyer drafted a document, a medical power of attorney. I just emailed you the link. If you can just open it and sign it electronically for me, I can fax it right over to the hospital. It'll authorize me to handle everything. Every instinct I had, honed by decades of scrutinizing contracts and financial statements, screamed danger. Why would he need me to sign something for him? Why wouldn't he just talk to the doctors himself? Why a lawyer? Why don't you just tell the doctors your decision over the phone? I asked, keeping my tone even. They need a signature, Carol. It's just hospital bureaucracy. You know how it is, he said, a note of impatience creeping into his voice. Please, just sign it. It's for Sarah.
Using our daughter's name as a weapon against me. The audacity was breathtaking. I'm here at the hospital, Kevin. I will speak to the doctors myself, I said firmly. Now he sounded genuinely annoyed. You're just going to slow things down. I have it all set up. Just click the link and sign. It will take you 2 minutes. I'll wait for the doctor, I repeated, my voice leaving no room for argument. He let out an exasperated sigh. Fine, do whatever you want, he snapped, and the line went dead. I stared at my phone, my heart hammering against my ribs. Something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. I opened my email app, and there it was. An email from an unfamiliar law firm with the subject line, Urgent, signature required for Sarah Miller. My hand trembled as I tapped the link. A legal document loaded onto the screen. I started to read. It wasn't a medical power of attorney, it was a durable power of attorney. For a non-accountant, the distinction might seem small, but for me, it was a chasm. Medical power of attorney is limited to healthcare decisions. A durable power of attorney, that was something else entirely. It would give him total and complete control over every aspect of Sarah's life, her finances, her property, her business, everything. He wasn't trying to save her. He was trying to rob her while she lay unconscious. I scrolled down, my eyes scanning the fine print, and that's when I saw the clause that made the blood freeze in my veins. It wasn't just about managing her existing assets. It specifically granted him the authority to liquidate any and all assets, including investment portfolios and real estate, at his sole discretion. He was planning to sell everything she owned. The document on my screen was a declaration of war. This wasn't a panicked husband making bad decisions. This was a predator making a calculated move. The rage I felt was so pure, so intense, it was almost clarifying. My grief and fear were still there, but now they had a target. My mind, trained to find patterns and discrepancies and endless columns of numbers, kicked into high gear. I needed to know where he was and what he was doing. I pulled out my laptop and connected to the hospital's spotty Wi-Fi. As a wedding gift, I had insisted on setting up Sarah and Kevin with a joint savings account linked to one of my own, purely for emergencies. I had also insisted on having online access, a decision Kevin had subtly resisted at the time. Now I knew why. I logged in, my fingers flying across the keyboard. The main checking account looked normal at first glance, but the savings account? It was a bloodbath. The carnage had started the day after the accident. A charge for a first-class flight to Las Vegas, then a cascade of transactions that made me physically ill. A $5,000 charge at the Bellagio, a $2,000 dinner at a celebrity chef's restaurant, charges from Gucci, from Prada, from a high-end watch store, and then there were the cash withdrawals. $500 here, $1,000 there, adding up to over $15,000 in less than a week. While my daughter's life hung in the balance, sustained by machines and the skill of surgeons, her husband was on a depraved spending spree in Las Vegas. He was draining their life savings, celebrating while she suffered. The sheer cruelty of it was staggering. It wasn't just abandonment. It was a gleeful betrayal.
My hands were shaking, but not from fear anymore. It was from pure, unadulterated fury. I needed to see his face. I needed to see the look on the face of the monster who could do this. I opened Instagram. Kevin's profile was private, a digital fortress, but I knew his friends. I remembered their names from the wedding. I started searching. It didn't take long. A man named Trent Lockwood, who I remembered as Kevin's best man, had a public profile, and he had been posting. A lot. My eyes landed on a photo uploaded just 3 hours earlier. My breath caught in my throat. There he was, Kevin. He was standing in the middle of what looked like a lavish penthouse suite, the glittering lights of the Las Vegas Strip visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind him. He was holding a glass of champagne, a wide, triumphant grin plastered on his face. His arm was wrapped tightly around the waist of a blonde woman in a bikini, a woman who was definitely not my daughter. He looked happy, healthy, not a care in the world. The only sign of the traumatic accident was a small, almost fashionable-looking Band-Aid over his eyebrow. The caption read, "Vegas won't know what hit it. The king is back. Hashtag living large, hashtag Vegas nights, hashtag high roller." I zoomed in, my vision blurring with rage. I studied every detail of the photo, the other people laughing, the bottles of expensive liquor on the table, the woman pressed against his side. This wasn't a man grieving. This was a man celebrating his freedom. His freedom from what? From my daughter? I saved a screenshot of the photo, my mind already working, formulating a plan. He had made a critical mistake. He thought I was just a grieving mother. He had forgotten I was a certified public accountant who had spent a lifetime untangling the financial messes of liars and cheats. He had just become my next audit, and I was going to dismantle his entire world, one frozen asset at a time. The switch inside my head had been flipped. The heartbroken mother was still there, crying silently in a corner of my soul, but the CPA was now in charge, cold, methodical, and absolutely relentless. My first call wasn't to the police, it was to the bank. Not the local branch, but the 24-hour fraud and security hotline. I knew from experience that this where the real power lay. I didn't have a personal banker I could call at a moment's notice. This was the real world, not a movie. I was just a retired accountant, a number in their system. But I had something more powerful than connections. I had information, and I had the unshakable conviction of a mother on a warpath. The first agent I spoke to was polite but unhelpful. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but we can't freeze an account without the primary account holder's consent." "I'm sorry, ma'am, but the primary account holder is my daughter, and she is unconscious in the ICU. Her husband, the joint account holder, is currently in Las Vegas fraudulently draining her funds." "Do you have proof of this, ma'am?" "I have her medical records, a police report number, and photographic evidence of his activities. What I need is to speak to your supervisor now." I was transferred. Then I was transferred again. Each time I repeated the story, my voice getting colder and more precise with each telling. I refused to be emotional. I presented it like a case study in financial malfeasance. I gave them dates, times, transaction amounts. I explained the durable power of attorney he had tried to trick me into signing. I was no longer a frantic mother. I was a forensic accountant laying out an open and shut case of fraud.
Finally, after what felt like an eternity, but was probably closer to 2 agonizing hours, I reached someone in the high-level security department, a man named David, whose calm, professional demeanor was a godsend. I laid out the entire story one last time. I could hear him typing furiously as I spoke. "Okay, Mrs. Peterson," he said after a long pause. "I've reviewed the account history. The velocity of the spending in Las Vegas, combined with the account holder's medical incapacitation, is a major red flag. I'm placing an immediate security hold on all associated accounts and credit cards pending a full investigation." A wave of relief so profound it almost buckled me, washed over. Everything, I confirmed, the checking, the savings, his personal credit card linked to the account? Everything, David confirmed. The next time he attempts a transaction, it will be declined. The ATM will not dispense cash. The card will be rejected. Thank you, David, I said, my voice thick with emotion for the first time. You have no idea what this means. I'm just doing my job, ma'am, he said kindly. I'm truly sorry for what your family is going through. After hanging up, I sat in the dim light of the hospital room, the only sounds the steady beep and whoosh of the machines keeping Sarah alive. I had cut the cord. I had severed his financial lifeline. He was stranded in his palace of sin, a king without a kingdom, and now all I had to do was wait for the fallout. And now, folks, this is where the story really takes a turn. I've just thrown a massive wrench in his plans, and he has no idea it was me. He's about to find out his endless party has come to a screeching halt. So get comfortable, because what happens next is the moment I'd been waiting for. I didn't have to wait long. Exactly 57 minutes after my call with David, my phone lit up, illuminating the dark room. The screen displayed a single name, Kevin. I let it ring once, twice, savoring the moment. Then I took a deep, steadying breath, swiped to answer, and put the phone to my ear. I said in the most neutral voice I could muster, "Carol Peterson speaking." The explosion on the other end of the line was immediate, and it was everything I had hoped for. "Carol, what the hell did you do?" His voice was a raw, guttural roar, barely coherent over the thumping bass of whatever party he was at. The smooth, charming facade was gone, replaced by the raw fury of a cornered animal. "I'm not sure what you mean, Kevin," I replied, my voice as cool and calm as a frozen lake. I wanted him to know he had lost all power to intimidate me. "Don't play dumb with me," he screamed. "My cards, they're all being declined. The hotel just tried to run my card for the suite, and it came back declined. The ATM ate my debit card. What did you do?" "Oh, dear," I said, injecting a note of mock concern into my voice. "That does sound inconvenient. Perhaps you've reached your credit limit. All those dinners and designer watches must add up." There was a moment of stunned silence on his end, followed by a sharp intake of breath. He realized I knew. "You've been spying on me," he hissed, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "I haven't had to spy, Kevin," I countered. "You left a trail of breadcrumbs a mile wide, a digital confession of your betrayal. It's all right there in the bank statements. While your wife, my daughter, is on a ventilator, you're living it up in Vegas with her money." He tried to backtrack, to regain control. "This is a misunderstanding. That trip, it was to clear my head, the trauma. You have no idea what it was like." "Spare me the performance," I cut him off, my voice like steel. "I've also seen the Instagram photos. Your trauma looks a lot like a party with a blonde who isn't your wife." He sputtered, for once at a loss for words. I pressed my advantage. "The police are also very interested in speaking with you, Kevin. Detective Ramirez of the LAPD, something about reckless driving under the influence, and a car crash that nearly killed someone. Does any of that ring a bell?" The background noise suddenly diminished. He had moved to a quieter spot. When he spoke again, the fake charm was gone, replaced with cold, hard menace. "Listen to me very carefully, you old bitch. You are going to call that bank, and you are going to unfreeze those accounts right now." "No," I said, simply. "That money is mine. We're married. What's hers is mine. That's the law." "There it is," I said softly, a grim satisfaction blooming in my chest. "The truth finally comes out. It was never about love, was it, Kevin? It was always about the money. You have no idea who you're messing with.
he threatened. On the contrary, I replied, my voice dropping to a near whisper. For the first time, I know exactly who I'm dealing with. The real question is, do you? Because you didn't just mess with a sick girl's money, you messed with her mother. And her mother is a CPA who knows how to read every line of the fine print. And by the way, how do you plan on paying for that penthouse suite now? I understand those places have a rather strict payment policy, and I imagine your new girlfriend isn't going to be too impressed when you can't even buy her a drink. He let out a string of curses so vile it would make a sailor blush, but it was the sound of a man who knew he was trapped. He had lost. Goodbye, Kevin, I said calmly, and I hung up the phone. I silenced my phone as it immediately began ringing again, and again. I let him rage into the void. I turned back to my daughter, her face peaceful in the dim night. I had won the first battle, but as I sat there, a chilling thought crept into my mind. He was right about one thing. The law could be complicated. He was still her husband. What if he found a way to fight back? I knew this was far from over, and I had a sinking feeling that his next move would be far more insidious than just angry phone calls. The next morning, the adrenaline from the phone call had worn off, replaced by a grim determination. I knew I needed the law on my side, and that meant convincing the police that this was more than just a marital dispute. Detective Ramirez arrived at the hospital around 10 a.m. He was a stocky man in his 50s, with tired eyes that had seen too much and a demeanor that suggested he had little patience for family drama. I had everything laid out for him on the small table in the waiting area. The printed bank statements with the Las Vegas charges highlighted, the screenshots from Instagram, and the details of the power of attorney Kevin had tried to trick me into signing. I explained the timeline, my voice clear and concise, presenting the facts as I would to a client. He listened, nodding occasionally, but his expression remained impassive, skeptical. "Mrs. Peterson," he said when I finished, his voice heavy with a weary professionalism. "I understand you're upset. Your daughter is in a terrible situation. But what you have here, it's a messy divorce waiting to happen. He's her husband. Legally, he has access to their joint funds." "But he abandoned her," I insisted, my frustration mounting. "He was driving drunk and nearly killed her." "The DUI and reckless driving are being investigated, absolutely," he said, closing his notebook. "But the financial aspect? That's a civil matter. Unless you can prove he intended to defraud her, it's his word against yours." He sounded dismissive, as if I were just another hysterical mother-in-law. He promised to keep me updated and left, leaving me feeling utterly deflated and alone. My sense of isolation deepened when Sarah's best friend, Maria, arrived a short while later. I had hoped for an ally, someone who knew Sarah and would see Kevin for who he was. But Maria, bless her heart, was a romantic. "Oh, Carol, this is all just so awful," she said, hugging me tightly. "I tried calling Kevin, but he didn't answer. He must be just falling apart somewhere. You know how much he loves Sarah." I stared at her. "Maria, he's not falling apart. He's in Las Vegas partying." She looked at me with wide, disbelieving eyes. "No, there has to be an explanation. Maybe he just couldn't handle seeing her like this. Men can be weird about hospitals, you know? He probably just needed to get away to process it all." I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake her and show her the pictures, the bank statements. But I saw in her eyes the same thing I'd seen in the detectives, a refusal to believe the worst. Kevin had spent years building his charming, devoted husband persona. It was a fortress, and I was on the outside, throwing pebbles against its walls. I felt a profound sense of despair. The system was skeptical, and the people who should have been on my side were making excuses for the monster who had done this. I realized with a chilling clarity that no one was coming to save us. If I wanted justice for my daughter, I would have to get it myself. As Maria left, still convinced this was all a tragic misunderstanding,
I sat back down in the hard plastic chair. I was on my own. Kevin had isolated Sarah, and now he had isolated me. I needed something more. I needed a smoking gun. Something so undeniable, so damning, that it would shatter Kevin's fortress of lies once and for all. My mind started racing, sifting through old conversations, stray comments, anything. And then a memory surfaced. A faint, unsettling comment Kevin had made months ago. A comment about planning for the future. The memory was hazy at first. A casual remark made over a Sunday barbecue. Kevin had been talking about a friend of his whose wife had passed away suddenly. "It's just so tragic," he'd said, shaking his head with that look of practiced sincerity. "Makes you realize how important it is to have your affairs in order. You know, life insurance, wills, all that boring stuff." At the time, it had seemed responsible, mature. Now, it felt sinister. My training as a CPA meant that I had a deep-seated belief in the power of a paper trail. People could lie, but documents rarely did. I knew Sarah had a credit monitoring service, a gift I'd given her years ago, and she had, thankfully, given me the login credentials, just in case. This was the just in case she could never have imagined. Back in the quiet of the hospital room, I opened my laptop again. The Wi-Fi was slow, each loading screen an exercise in frustration. I logged into the credit monitoring site. My eyes scanned the lines of data, the list of accounts, the payment histories. It all looked normal. Until I saw it. A recurring monthly payment automatically debited from their joint account for the last 8 months. The payee was a name I recognized, one of the largest life insurance companies in the country. My breath hitched. It was possible, of course, that they had taken out a policy together, a responsible step for a young married couple, but Kevin had never mentioned it. And the amount was significant. Getting information from an insurance company is notoriously difficult. Privacy laws are ironclad, but desperation is a powerful motivator. I spent the next 3 hours on the phone. I started by calling the main customer service line, claiming to be Sarah, saying that I'd lost my policy documents. I used her date of birth, her social security number. I was transferred from department to department. I was told they couldn't help me without written consent. I was about to give up when I decided to try a different tactic. I called back and got a new agent, a young man who sounded bored and tired. This time, I didn't pretend to be Sarah. I was her mother. My voice was thick with fake tears. I told him my daughter had been in a terrible accident, that she was unconscious, and that I was desperately trying to get her finances in order to pay for her mounting medical bills. I told him I just needed to confirm if the policy was active so the hospital could be assured of payment. It was a long shot, a morally gray lie born of pure necessity. Perhaps he was new. Perhaps he was just a kind soul, but he put me on hold. When he came back, he said, "Ma'am, I can't give you specific details, but I can confirm there is an active policy. It was taken out 8 months ago." "Thank you," I whispered. "Can you just tell me, is it a joint policy?" There was another pause. "No, ma'am," he said. "The policy is on the life of Sarah Miller. The sole beneficiary is listed as her husband, Kevin Miller." My hand holding the phone started to shake. "And the value of the policy?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Ma'am, I really shouldn't," he started. "Please," I begged. "I just need to know." He sighed. $1 million. The phone slipped from my grasp and clattered onto the floor. $1 million. The car crash wasn't about recklessness. The abandonment wasn't about panic. The spending spree wasn't about grief. It was a celebration. He thought he had won. He thought he was about to become a millionaire. This wasn't an accident. This was an attempted murder. I snatched the phone off the floor and immediately dialed Detective Ramirez's direct line, my mind reeling with the horrifying implications.
My voice was shaking with a fury so profound it felt like it could burn through the phone lines. "Detective," I said, the words tumbling out, "you asked for proof of intent. Well, I have it. I have a million reasons why Caden Miller was driving 90 miles an hour. It's because my daughter is worth more to him dead than alive." For the first time, there was a long, stunned silence on the other end of the line. The discovery of the life insurance policy was the tipping point. It was the piece of the puzzle that changed everything from a tragic domestic situation into a cold-blooded criminal investigation. The skepticism in Detective Ramirez's voice was gone, replaced with a grim urgency. He told me to forward him everything I had. He was contacting the Las Vegas PD. A warrant was being issued. The machine of justice, slow and cumbersome, had finally begun to grind into motion.
For me, though, the legal battle faded into the background. My entire world was contained within the four walls of room 512. My only focus was Sarah. The days blurred into a monotonous cycle of beeping monitors, hushed conversations with doctors, and endless, one-sided conversations with my unconscious daughter. I read to her from her favorite books, I told her stories from her childhood, I updated her on the case against Kevin, my voice a low, steady murmur against the rhythmic whoosh of the ventilator. Then, on the 10th day of my vigil, something changed. The medical team decided to start slowly reducing the heavy sedation that was keeping her in a medically induced coma. "We need to see how her brain responds," the neurosurgeon explained. "It's a slow process. Don't expect miracles." I didn't expect miracles. I just prayed for a sign. The first sign was almost imperceptible, a slight flutter of her eyelids. I thought I had imagined it, but then it happened again. A few hours later, as I was holding her hand, I felt a faint twitch in her fingers. My heart leaped into my throat. I squeezed her hand gently. "Sarah, can you hear me, baby? Squeeze my hand if you can hear me." Nothing, but I knew what I had felt. The next day brought more signs, a small groan, a spontaneous movement of her arm. Each one was a tiny victory, a flicker of light in an endless tunnel of darkness. The doctors were cautiously optimistic. "These are all positive indicators," they told me. "Her brain is starting to wake up." And then, on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, nearly 2 weeks after the crash, it happened. I was sitting by her bed, quietly reading a magazine, when I heard a sound. It was a hoarse, raspy whisper. "Mom?" My head snapped up. Sarah's eyes were open. They were hazy, confused, but they were open, and they were looking at me. The magazine fell from my lap. Tears instantly welled in my eyes, so thick I could barely see her. "I'm here, sweetheart," I choked out, rushing to her side and taking her hand. "Oh, my baby, I'm right here." She blinked slowly, trying to make sense of her surroundings. The tube was still in her throat, so she couldn't speak more, but she was aware. She was present. My daughter was back. The relief was a physical force so powerful it made my knees weak. She was here. She had survived. The nurses rushed in, and the room became a flurry of activity. But I didn't care. All I could see was my daughter's eyes open and looking at me. The long nightmare was finally starting to end. And if you've been on this journey with me so far, thank you. Thank you for your patience and for sticking with my story. It means the world to me. If you're still here, do me a favor and just type the number 1 in the comments below so I know you're still with me. Knowing you're listening gives me the strength to tell the rest of this. Because as it turned out, Sarah's recovery wasn't just the end of one nightmare. It was the beginning of another. A few days later, after the breathing tube was removed, she was finally able to speak. And the first memory that came back to her about the accident was a detail so chilling, so horrifying, it would become the final nail in Kevin's coffin. Sarah's recovery was a slow, painstaking process. Her voice was weak and raspy from the intubation, and her memories returned in fractured, confusing pieces. She remembered the argument. That part was clear. It had started at dinner.
He told me he'd lost everything, she whispered, her eyes fixed on a distant point on the hospital room wall. Some sure thing crypto investment he'd poured all his money into. It had crashed. He was wiped out. Worse, he owed people money. A lot of money. I listened to her, my heart aching for her, trying to keep my expression neutral. I didn't want my rage to add to her trauma. He wanted me to liquidate my portfolio, she continued, her voice trembling slightly. The money you helped me set up from Grandma's inheritance? He said it was the only way, that we were a team. What did you say? I asked gently. A flicker of her old fire returned to her eyes. I said no. I told him it was reckless. I told him our security was more important than bailing him out of another one of his get-rich-quick schemes. He got so angry, Mom. I'd never seen him like that. His eyes, they were cold. The scene she painted was terrifyingly clear. They had gotten into the car, the argument still raging. He was driving erratically, speeding up, weaving through traffic on the 101 freeway. I begged him to slow down, she said, tears now streaming down her cheeks. I was scared. I told him he was going to kill us. She paused, taking a shuddering breath. I waited, not wanting to push her. She finally said, her voice dropping to a horrified whisper, he looked at me, and he said something I'll never forget. He said, if I can't have it, then nobody can. My blood ran cold. It was a confession. And then she choked out, her body starting to shake. He reached across the console. I thought he was going to hit me, but he didn't. He pressed the button. What button, sweetheart? I asked, though I know what the answer. The release button, she subbed. And then he floored it. He aimed the car right at the divider. The last thing I remember is the sound of him laughing. I held my daughter as she wept, my own tears of fury and grief mingling with hers. It was worse than I could have ever imagined. This wasn't a crime of passion or a reckless mistake. This was a cold, calculated execution attempt, motivated by pure greed. He had tried to murder her. As soon as Sarah was calm, I called Detective Ramirez. I put the phone on speaker, and with a strength that astounded me, Sarah repeated her story, her voice shaking but clear. There was a long silence on the other end of the line when she finished. We've got him, Ramirez said, his voice grim. We just arrested him at LAX. He was trying to board a one-way flight to Cancun with a fake ID. He was caught. The net had closed. Justice was coming. I felt a surge of triumph. But our story had one more shocking twist in store. A week later, as Kevin sat in a jail cell awaiting his arraignment, I received a phone call from a blocked number. A woman's hesitant voice came on the line. Is this Carol Peterson? She asked. You don't know me, but I think I was married to the man who tried to kill your daughter. And then she said the words that proved just how deep this evil ran. Only when I knew him, his name wasn't Kevin Miller. The woman on the phone introduced herself as Jessica Evans, calling from Phoenix, Arizona. Her voice was shaky, but underscored with a hard-won strength that I recognized immediately. It was the voice of a survivor. She began, I saw his mugshot on the national news. They called him Kevin Miller, but the man I married 2 years ago, the man who ruined my life, he called himself Jason Cole. But it's him. I'd recognize that face anywhere.
I sat down, my legs suddenly weak. My mind struggled to process this new information. A different name? Jessica's story was a chilling echo of our own nightmare. She was a successful real estate agent who had fallen for Jason's charm and ambition. He had swept her off her feet. They were married within 6 months. He was the perfect, doting husband. Until the money troubles started. He claimed to be a day trader, Jessica explained, a bitter irony in her voice. He had a system. He convinced me to give him access to my savings to invest for us. I was so blind. I gave him everything. Then came the life insurance policy. He told me it was the responsible thing to do, she said, her voice thick with regret. $1 million policy, just like your daughter's. He said it was to protect me. 3 weeks after the policy was activated, the accident happened. They were driving home late one night on a deserted stretch of highway. He was driving, she said, her voice dropping. He swerved suddenly, claiming he was avoiding a coyote. We rolled 3 times. I woke up in the hospital with a shattered pelvis and a concussion. He walked away with a few scratches. My entire body went cold. It was the same pattern, the exact same M.O. And then what happened? I asked, already dreading the answer. He was gone, she said simply. But the time I was coherent enough to ask for him, he had vanished. He had cleared out my bank account, maxed out my credit cards, and disappeared off the face of the earth. The police investigated, but they ruled the crash an accident. They treated me like a scorned woman, not a victim. They said what he did with the money was a civil matter. They never found him. She had spent the last 2 years rebuilding her life, both financially and emotionally. She had never known what happened to him until she saw his face on her television screen linked to my daughter's story. He's not just a con man, Carol, she said, her voice hardening with conviction. He's a predator. He finds successful women, isolates them, drains their resources, and then he tries to cash in. I was lucky. He failed with me, and it looks like he failed with your daughter, too. I felt a dizzying mix of horror and a strange, grim sense of validation. I wasn't crazy. My instincts had been right from the very beginning. Kevin, or Jason, or whatever his real name was, had a history. He had a playbook, and my daughter was his latest target. Jessica, I said, my voice firm, would you be willing to tell your story to the police, to Detective Ramirez? That's why I called, she replied without hesitation. I couldn't live with myself if I stayed silent and he got away with it again. This time he needs to be stopped, for good. I immediately connected her with Detective Ramirez. Her testimony transformed the case. It was no longer one woman's word against her husband's word. It was a documented pattern of predatory behavior, of fraud, and of attempted murder. The charges against Kevin were piling up, creating an ironclad case. He wasn't going to be able to charm his way out of this. Not this time. Now the only question left was whether Sarah would have the strength to face the man who had worn the face of a loving husband while secretly plotting her death. 2 weeks later, the meeting was arranged. It wasn't in a courtroom, but in a sterile, featureless conference room at the hospital. It was Sarah's request. She said she needed to see him, to face him, not as a victim in a witness box, but on her own terms. I was terrified for her. Her body was still healing, her spirit so fragile. But I saw a fire in her eyes that I hadn't seen since before the accident. This was something she had to do. Detective Ramirez and a uniformed officer were in the room with us. The entire meeting was being recorded. I sat beside Sarah, my hand resting on her wheelchair, ready to wheel her out at a moment's notice. The door opened, and 2 guards escorted Kevin in. The change in him was shocking. The confident, charismatic man was gone. In his place was a pale, gaunt figure in an orange jumpsuit, his eyes darting around the room like a trapped rat. The swagger was gone, replaced by the slumped shoulders of defeat. His eyes landed on Sarah. For a split second, I saw a flicker of genuine shock at the extent of her injuries, the casts, the bruises still visible on her skin. Then the mask slipped back into place. His face crumpled into a mask of practiced remorse. "Sarah!" he began, his voice thick with fake emotion. "Oh my God, I've been so worried. They wouldn't let me see you." Sarah said nothing. She just watched him, her gaze level and unwavering. Her silence unnerved him. "This is all a huge misunderstanding," he continued, turning his pleading eyes to me. "Carol, you have to believe me. I panicked after the accident. I made some terrible choices, I know that, but I never meant to hurt her. I love her." It was a masterful performance. He was playing the part of the flawed but loving husband to perfection. But we knew the truth.
He turned back to Sarah. The money, the trip, I can explain everything. I was trying to raise money for your medical bills. I was networking. Finally, Sarah spoke. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like a shard of glass. Tell me about Jessica Evans. Kevin froze. The color drained from his face. Who? He stammered, his eyes wide with genuine confusion and panic. Jessica Evans, Sarah repeated, her voice gaining strength. From Phoenix. Or should I call you Jason? Is that the name she knew you by? The mask didn't just slip, it shattered. He stared at her, his mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. He was exposed, and he knew it. I've seen the evidence, Kevin, Sarah continued, her voice now ringing with a power that made me sit up straighter. The insurance policy, the other women, the lies. I remember everything. I remember you speeding up. I remember you telling me that if you couldn't have my money, nobody could. I remember you unbuckling my seatbelt. The pretense of innocence vanished, replaced by a cold, reptilian fury. He glared at her, his eyes filled with pure hatred. You have no idea what you're doing. You're nothing without me. And then my daughter did the most remarkable thing. She smiled. It was a small, sad, but incredibly powerful smile. No, Kevin, she said, her voice clear and strong. Without you, I'm safe. Without you, I'm free. And you're going to prison for a very long time. She nodded to Detective Ramirez, a silent signal that she was done. As the guards moved to escort Kevin out, he lunged forward, his face contorted in a mask of desperation. Sarah, please! We can fix this! But Sarah had already turned her wheelchair away, her eyes meeting mine. In them, I saw not the tears of a victim, but the triumphant gleam of a survivor. She had faced the monster who had tried to destroy her, and she had won. As the door closed behind him, I knew our journey was far from over, but the most important battle had just been won. The journey to true freedom was just beginning.
Facing Kevin was a turning point, but it wasn't a finish line. The legal battle was over. Faced with the testimony of both Sarah and Jessica, he accepted a plea bargain rather than face a jury. 30 years for attempted murder, fraud, and a litany of other charges. He would be an old man before he ever saw the outside of a prison cell again. Justice had been served. But healing was a different kind of sentence, and it was one Sarah had to serve every single day. Our home transformed. The elegant dining room where we used to host holiday dinners became a physical therapy gym. We replaced the antique mahogany table with a set of parallel bars, resistance bands hung from doorknobs, and colorful therapy balls were tucked into corners. Every day was a battle to teach her legs how to bear her weight again, a battle to regain the fine motor skills in her hands, a battle against the pain, the frustration, and the crushing exhaustion. There were days she would collapse in tears, throwing her walker across the room in a fit of rage at her own body's betrayal. There were nights I would wake to the sound of her screaming, trapped in a nightmare of screeching tires and shattering glass. And I was there for all of it. I held her when she cried. I pushed her when she wanted to give up. I became her cook, her chauffeur, her nurse, and her drill sergeant. We were a team, bound together by trauma and an unbreakable love. Slowly, painstakingly, progress came. It was measured not in weeks or months, but in tiny, monumental victories. The first time she stood on her own for 10 seconds. The first time she was able to hold a fork steady enough to eat a meal by herself. The day she took her first shuffling steps without the parallel bars, her face a mask of terror and triumph. I cried more in those months than I had in my entire life. Not tears of sadness, but tears of overwhelming pride. The physical scars began to fade, but the invisible ones remained. She struggled with memory lapses, a lingering side effect of the traumatic brain injury. She had to learn coping mechanisms for the anxiety that would ambush her in crowded places. But through it all, she never lost her spirit. In fact, the fire within her seemed to burn brighter than ever before. The ordeal had stripped away everything that was non-essential, leaving behind a core of pure, unshakable strength. She started to talk about the future, something I had been afraid to hope for. She didn't want to go back to her old life, her old job in graphic design. She said that life belonged to a different person. She wanted to do something that mattered. 1 year after the sentencing, she sat me down at the kitchen table. She had been working on something secretly on her laptop for weeks. She turned the screen towards me. It was a website she had designed. The homepage had a simple, elegant title, The Phoenix Fund. Its mission, to provide financial aid and legal resources for victims of intimate partner financial abuse. I want to use what happened to me to help other women, she said, her voice filled with passion I hadn't heard in years. I had you, Mom. You had your financial knowledge and your strength. Most women in this situation have no one. I want to be their someone. I looked at my daughter, this incredible, resilient woman who had been to hell and back, and I knew, without a doubt, that she was going to change the world. I had no idea then just how true that would be. The Phoenix Fund was just the beginning of Sarah's transformation. In the quiet hours between her therapy sessions, she had found her way back to her first love, art. But the art she created now was different. It was raw, powerful, and unflinchingly honest. She poured her pain, her rage, and her hope onto the canvas. Her first series of paintings was a visceral depiction of her journey. The early pieces were dark and chaotic, full of jagged lines and fractured images, conveying the terror and confusion of her time in the ICU. Then gradually, light began to creep into the compositions. The broken pieces started to reassemble, not back into their original forms, but into something new, something stronger, mosaics of resilience. A friend of hers who owned a small gallery in downtown LA saw the collection and was stunned. She insisted on giving Sarah a solo exhibition. Sarah was hesitant at first, feeling exposed and vulnerable. But then she realized this was another way to tell her story, to connect with people on a level that words couldn't reach. The exhibition was titled Fragments to Wholeness. The opening night was packed. People from all walks of life stood in front of her paintings, their faces a mixture of awe and deep emotion. I watched from a corner of the gallery as Sarah, leaning on a sleek, modern cane that had replaced her walker, moved through the crowd talking about her work. She wasn't just talking about color and composition, she was talking about trauma, survival, and the process of rebuilding a life from the ashes. The response was overwhelming. Red sold dots appeared next to painting after painting. But it wasn't about the money. Every cent of the proceeds was being donated directly to the Phoenix Fund. The exhibition wasn't a commercial venture. It was a declaration. It was Sarah reclaiming her own narrative, turning her deepest wounds into a source of strength and inspiration for others. Late in the evening, after most of the crowd had thinned, Sarah guided me to the centerpiece of the exhibition. It was a massive canvas titled Awakening. It depicted a female figure, her body a mosaic of scars and vibrant colors, emerging from a dark, fractured background into a brilliant, warm light. You couldn't have done any of this without you, Mom, she said softly, her eyes glistening. I showed you what real strength looked like. I replied, my own voice thick with emotion. You had that strength inside you all along. I just helped clear away the wreckage so you could find it. Just then, her phone buzzed. It was an email notification for the fund. She opened it, and her eyes widened. Mom, look! She showed me the screen. A major corporation had read a review of the exhibition online and had just made a 6-figure donation. The fund, which had started as an idea on a laptop, was now a serious force for change. That night, as we drove home, Sarah was quiet for a long time. Then she turned to me and showed me a letter she had received earlier that day. It was from a woman in her 70s, a woman who had seen Sarah's story on the local news. The letter read,
I have been in a financially and emotionally abusive marriage for 45 years. I always thought it was too late for me to leave. Your story gave me the courage. Yesterday, I packed a bag. Thank you for showing me it's never too late to start over." Sarah looked at me, tears in her eyes, and said, This is why I survived."
That letter was the first of many. It was as if a dam had broken. Hundreds, then thousands of emails and letters poured in from women all across the country, and even from around the world. They were teachers, doctors, stay-at-home moms, CEOs. Women from every walk of life, sharing their own stories of betrayal, control, and ultimately of survival. They told us that Sarah's courage had given them the strength to leave, to report fraud, to finally reclaim their own voices after years of being silenced. Our lives took on a new purpose. We were invited to speak at community centers, women's shelters, and eventually at national conferences on domestic abuse and financial literacy. At first, Sarah's voice would tremble as she stood at the podium. But with each telling, it grew steadier, stronger. She shared her story not as a cautionary tale, but as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. And then I would speak. I didn't speak as a victim's mother. I spoke as a woman who had spent her life believing that being strong meant being quiet and stoic. I told them the truth I had learned in the crucible of room 512. Real strength isn't about enduring pain silently. It's about raising your voice, demanding answers, and refusing to look away when you see injustice. The story of what Kevin did, his ultimate act of evil, became a footnote. The real story, the one that mattered, was what came after. The legacy we were building wasn't one of tragedy, it was one of empowerment. Kevin had tried to destroy one woman. In his spectacular failure, he had inadvertently ignited a fire in thousands. Life didn't become perfect. It never does. There are still days when Sarah's leg aches, days when a loud noise makes her jump. But our life became ours again. We traveled, sometimes back to the very places in Oregon where my nightmare had begun. This time, Sarah walked beside me, slower than before, but freer. Kevin Thompson, or Jason Cole, or whatever his real name is, remains behind bars, a forgotten man in a system designed to erase him. But our story, our truth, has taken on a life of its own. Our story has a dark beginning, but it is not a story about darkness. It is a story about the light that finds its way through the cracks. Kevin underestimated a fundamental truth: the ferocious power of a woman who has decided she has had enough, and the limitless strength of a mother who will burn down the world to protect her child. If you are listening to this story and you see even a small piece of yourself in it, please know this: you are not alone. You are stronger than you know, and it is never, ever too late to reclaim your life. Thank you for listening. If our story has touched you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you have ever had to fight your way back from a dark place, please share a piece of your strength in the comments below. Let's remind the world that we can survive, we can rise, and we do it together.